This ride is a ride that's trying to summarize what I did and what I read over the last 2.5 weeks, as inspired mostly by Dan's blog, Harvard to the Bighouse. I forgot to put my microphone on. I hope this is recording okay on the camera. Again, thanks for joining me. The ride is very good. There's a summary at the end. There is some good news again. There's 2 antiviral drugs that are working, and so keep your ears open, keep your eyes open, but remember, this is probably a little bit worse than they've been saying up until now, so be prepared for the worst and watch out for each other. Love your neighbor. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, at least I'm going home. Well, good evening, Pittsburgh and universe. This is JC on a bike. My name is JC and this is Journal Club on a Bike. This is my 3rd coronavirus video. This one is going to be the best, most thorough, and most succinct of them all. I am following just one blog because I'm afraid that Dan got it completely right from the very beginning. It is the same blog that inspired my original coronavirus video. I'm just updating this video to give one more shout out to Dan's blog and to try and make sure that I get all the details right, so that if you're going to watch one coronavirus video from me, it should probably be this one. So I'm going to first give you an introduction as to what the issue is, what the yeah, seriously. Oh my God, what are you doing? It's just crazy. You can't help but just wonder how it's possible that more people are not dead in this town. I guess I'm the only one riding a bike. Sorry for that interruption. So, the gist of it is simple. In history, there have been a couple major zoonotic events. Zoonotic events being a viral event where the virus crosses over from animals into humans. And crosses species is really what zoonotic means. So the issue is, we've had a number of these viruses. SARS was one in 2003, MERS was one in 2012, and the research that has stemmed or has evolved from these outbreaks, to understand these outbreaks, is understood, at least to a certain extent, to be required, to be necessary, to be needed. And so what we need to really think about, and what we're trying to discover here, what we're trying to figure out, is this a natural occurring event? And, is it no different than any other coronavirus outbreak? Remember that SARS infected about 8,000 people around the world, but then we contained it and it kind of disappeared. MERS is still going around. MERS emerged about 8 times out of the Middle East, out of camels into humans. It has a 37% mortality rate, but it doesn't spread very easily from human to human. So again, not really any pandemic potential. But then in January of this year, there started to emerge some reports about a unknown pneumonia in the Wuhan district in Wuhan, China. And Chinese government said nothing, the CDC said nothing, and the immediate sort of backlash against anybody who was suggesting that this was a big deal was pretty absurd. I mean, we have, lots of different talking points on the radio and on the TV telling us not to worry. We have virologists that worked at the University of North Carolina, where coronavirus research has been done for years. We had viral researchers coming online to tell us that we should be more worried about the flu than the coronavirus. And yet somehow, nothing that they've said has come true. The virus is still spreading. It's now in like 12 countries. It's on every continent. And so the idea that this event is somehow just an unfortunate biological accident, that somebody ate a bat or somebody got pissed on by a bat and now we have a global pandemic, is absurd. And the reason why it's absurd is because the circumstantial evidence surrounding what we have done in the last, let's say, 20 years with viral research, it suggests the exact opposite. The idea that this is a natural virus is almost, I think that the odds are almost nil. Now, I know that there are a lot of papers and a lot of claims out there that say it's just a bat coronavirus and, we got unlucky and it came from this market. But there is very good evidence to believe that at least the first 3 to 5 index cases were not exposed to that market. And the other reason to believe that this is not true is because, generally speaking, a zoonotic event of that nature does not result in a super spreading virus, simply because the mutation that allows zoonotic jump is usually a mutation that's random and not ideal. This coronavirus appears to express an ideal mutation never before seen in the coronavirus clade, and allows an unpredicted homology with the ACE2 receptor, an unpredicted affinity, for the ACT2 receptor that a gene jockey would have never designed, but could have selected for. Now we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of it as we go through this ride, but I think the most important thing to understand is coming to grips with what our government is really motivated by and why there would be a cover-up in the first place. Obviously, telling everybody there's going to be a pandemic ain't going to help, so they're not going to do that right away. You can question whether or not they've known for a while, but I guess they did. Simply because the long history of research that we have to look at is pretty damn impressive. And the things that happened in the first month in China were really too much to discount. And the too much to discount things include the kinds of things that they did. They bulldozed dirt in front of tunnels so that people couldn't leave Wuhan. They blocked and barricaded streets. They've welded shut doors. They've taken people away in boxes. They've fogged the streets. These are all actions of a government that knows that something much deadlier than SARS virus is loose. These are the actions of a government that's terrified. And I don't think there's any other way to interpret their actions and their continued sort of misinformation, not releasing accurate numbers, claiming that cases are going down, but they're not. And so the thing that really helped me understand the extent to which we are in trouble is Dan's blog, Harvard to the Bighouse. And so from here on home, I'm going to tell the story of that blog and try to give you an idea of the sheer mountain of circumstantial evidence and mountain of real evidence that suggests that we have had the technology to edit large-scale positive strain RNA viruses for at least 20 years. And the researchers that are now working in Wuhan trained with us in America, where during that training they published techniques and actual results from chimeric viruses between bat coronaviruses and the original SARS coronavirus from 2003. So that paper is the central key sort of cog or key to this result, because that paper seems to contain all of the smoking gun you need. But there's more. I think the first paper that comes out that demonstrates definitively that we can create an entire coronavirus from scratch is in 2000 in PNAS. And there, they use cDNA in a bacteria to generate the RNA sequence that they wanted, and they swapped a spike protein from one bovine virus or equine virus to another. I can't remember exactly what it was. They were looking at a virus that I believe works in pigs, and they swapped the spike protein from one to another and showed that the spike protein swap worked and that they could increase the effectiveness of viral entry. So that technology is there, and interestingly enough, the folks at Wuhan have had that technology because they collaborated with us during the 2010s, let's say, when we were working with several of their researchers at the University of North Carolina on coronaviruses to get a handle on what was happening with the coronavirus as it changed and mutated, and what parts of the coronavirus were important for its behavior in terms of infection rate and these kinds of things. So it's not to say that this research isn't necessarily good, but when this research was going on from about 2002, when they first synthesized a full virus from scratch, that was a polio virus. It's much smaller than a coronavirus, but they did it. But the paper that brags about that 2002 polio virus is 2 years behind the paper that I'm citing now in PNAS, where they do the complete coronavirus. So it's almost like they're keeping it from us. They're not really publicizing it as much as they could. And that's pretty impressive, because that paper is from 2000. That's 20 years ago. And so the reports that you've read, for example, that say that we can't do this are absolutely baloney. We have been able to engineer large genome size unlimited coronaviruses since somewhere around 2000 to 2002. We have. There's a tremendous amount of money to be lost. Money in the stock market, money in futures, money in commodities. And so these people are playing these numbers now, and they're using the release of the data and the release of the warnings and the lack of information as a way of making sure that they can maximally financially benefit from this. I am sure of that. And I think one of the things that, you know, if we want to break it right down to the timeline again, you know, we have for 20 years had the skills to alter the RNA of these viruses. And we've got hundreds of publications out where we've isolated viruses from bats and pigs, and all these coronaviruses are new. All these coronaviruses that are from animals have the potential to become a zoonotic virus. And certainly if we start messing around with them, we can get in a scenario where we've created a virus that's more strong than we want, more virulent than we wanted. And the question becomes, I think, and this is where I really wanted to understand it, was why would we be doing it? Why would we be doing this gain-of-function research? The gain-of-function research was officially banned by the NIH between 2014 and 2017. Curiously enough, this chimeric virus paper came out during this year, the 2014. So it's not clear whether they had an exemption or whether the work was done before the ban was put in place. But either way, that paper was done in America, and we took the SARS coronavirus spike protein and we put it on a novel bat coronavirus. And what we created in that paper was an extremely virulent bat virus that used the SARS spike protein to gain entry into human cells. So what they had done in that paper is essentially created in the laboratory a zoonosis. They altered the DNA of a bat virus that would not have infected humans and inserted the spike protein from the SARS coronavirus that allowed it to infect humans. And the people that were on that paper, some of them now work in Wuhan. This is a laboratory virus. It is likely an engineered laboratory virus. And therefore, the virulency of this virus is yet unknown. The most recent paper that I found, that Dan found, is a paper that gives numbers as high as R06. And SARS was 1.7. If you look at the numbers and how far and fast it's spreading in Europe, the shit's airborne. It's also been detected in feces. So the bottom line is it's coming. It's coming for sure. But if you want some background on why it's coming or what they did, about the best I can offer is that they either designed it, which doesn't seem very likely because the sequence is not something that we would predict. The spike protein is a novel binding site for the ACE2 receptor that we would not have predicted from computer hunting and computer modeling. So it's more likely that what they did was culture the virus. So they found it in the wild and then they grew it in an animal host. Let's say ferrets. The reason why Dan asserts that it might be ferrets is because ferrets have an ACE2 receptor very homologous to human. So if you grew the virus in ferrets and then screened the viral titers in those ferrets for novel viruses, and you found one that infected these ferrets very well, you would also might be enriching for variants that would infect humans. So it doesn't have to even be engineering. It could just as easily be that in the laboratory with lots of animals and lots of time and lots of technicians, they just screened viruses from the wild and screened viruses from generational culturing in other animal hosts. And they could have a whole cabinet full of viruses that they're studying. A whole cabinet full of novel coronaviruses with interesting properties. Why would they do this? That's the big question. Well, Dan's even nailed that part. So you can find patent applications in Germany filed for coronavirus vaccines already a year ago. In fact, you can even see that a lot of the reporting about this started in December. And that in October, China and the rest of the world was preparing for something called Event 201. And Event 201 was a Johns Hopkins organized event about preparing for a frickin' pandemic. This was in October in China. I mean, I know that that's just circumstantial, but I mean, things line up so terrible in this story. And the way that the deniability is lined up, it's just awful. The papers that look at bat coronaviruses and collect bat coronaviruses, and there's even a paper that claims that they found evidence for bat coronaviruses in India that might already be able to jump to humans. It's like they made a paper trail in 2019 just so that they would have plausible deniability that this was just another zoonosis. And that's why I think they told the story from the beginning about that frickin' market. Because if it's a zoonosis out of the market, then nobody's mad at China. Nobody will be mad at the States. Nobody will be mad at anybody. And they can continue working on their gain of function bullshit. Now, I don't think we should work on gain of function, but it's very difficult to draw a line accurately to where gain of function ends and legitimate research begins. And that's the reason why this research was being done in the first place, or at least that's the guise under which this research was being done. The idea was to make a vaccine for coronavirus, but not in the way that you're thinking. And that's a neat thing. So I didn't know this, but Dan showed me and I read and found out about it, that for a long time they've been thinking that the coronavirus would be an excellent vaccine vector because the common cold is a virus that all of us have and get infected with regularly. And we don't produce a huge antibody response to it anymore. The way that we deal with the common cold is not a full-on immune response. We've become used to it, essentially. So the idea was that if we could make a vaccine for the AIDS virus using a coronavirus, because the common cold virus is relatively innocuous, if we could engineer something where an epitope, an epitope is the target site of an antibody, and the antibody is the proteins that your body produces to identify foreign material. You make antibodies to something, and then when they stick to it, the body gets rid of it. So this is where it really gets creepy, because when they started using coronavirus to try and vaccinate people, one of the best examples I've found is where they tried to vaccinate people to SARS. And they only tested it in mice. But that vaccine did not work out well. And they weren't sure why, but when they used this weakened SARS virus to inoculate animals, then the next time that they got SARS, they developed an autoimmune condition in their lungs. And so this paper very much cautioned using a coronavirus-based immunotherapy because it could have unintended consequences. What likely happened there is that the body developed antibodies to the ACE receptor, and the ACE2 receptor, and then attacked your own lungs. And what gets me about this, and what bothers me about this, is that it's very easy for me to imagine a scenario using this data that explains all the videos of everybody collapsing in China. We've all seen the pictures of just some dude laying in the middle of the airport, or laying in the middle of a cafe, or laying in the middle of the frickin' street and getting picked up by an ambulance in China. Those were the videos that were being leaked regularly when this bullshit first started. And those people are likely the people, for whatever reason, have developed a very severe pneumonia and possibly even an autoimmune reaction from it. There's not a real good explanation. There's some anecdotal stuff out there that suggests that the ACE2 receptor might be enriched in Asian populations, but I can't find any verification of that. But I did find one paper which suggested that the ACE2 receptor might be enriched in the lungs of Asian people, making them more vulnerable to a more severe infection. Again, just anecdotal. So, what it seems to be, the best I can tell, is that this virus can occasionally interact with the immune system in such a way to cause antibodies to be produced which are not specific enough for the virus and can cause autoimmunity. That could even come from the fact that the spike protein is not a perfect match for the ACE2. So when antibodies are made to that spike protein, when they bind to the spike protein, it's thought that this spike protein can change conformation and then, believe it or not, use a different receptor to get into even more cells. Right. Thanks for joining me on my ride. The ride that follows this talk is a ride which discusses the coronavirus as best I can after 2 weeks of pretty heavy research in my spare time. I am a biologist, but I'm not a virologist, so take that with a grain of salt, take the video with a grain of salt. But my video is based on a blog by called Harvard at the Bighouse, Harvard to the Bighouse, and Dan's blog had this story right from the beginning, and that's why I covered it. The basic gist of it is that this is likely a virus that came out of the laboratory in Wuhan. You can debate about whether this is gain-of-function research or whether it was somehow naturally acquired, but the bottom line is that we had the technology for at least 20 years. We've been doing the research for at least 15 years, and the researchers that know how to do it are in Wuhan. So the idea that this is a zoonosis is likely just an excuse to cover up from the fact that they've been doing gain-of-function research in the United States and in Canada and in Australia and in China for about 10 to 15 years now. And the only question was really in China is when it was going to get out. In Beijing, they've had 4 separate releases of SARS virus since SARS was discovered in 2003. In the world, after 2003, we've had MERS virus break in 2012. So there is reason to believe that zoonosis occurs. But generally speaking, zoonosis does not release a superbug, simply because, generally speaking, the mutation that allows the zoonotic jump is not a mutation that's specific enough to allow it also to be hypervirulent in the new species that it jumps to. So all of this circumstantial evidence leads me to believe, and Dan to believe, and his expert to believe, that this virus was a gigantic mistake. It was probably found, it was probably enriched, it might have even been created in a laboratory in Wuhan as a way of creating a vaccine for coronavirus, or a vaccine for AIDS, or a vaccine for SARS. I have evidence that they've tried to do coronavirus vaccines with AIDS. I have virus, and Dan has evidence that they have done vaccines with coronavirus for SARS. The idea was to make a weakened virus which had a lot of the immunoproperties of the virulent virus so that your body would make antibodies to it and then impart immunity on these hypervirulent viruses. That was also the idea of using coronavirus to make an AIDS vaccine. If you could use a virus that was a fairly innocuous virus like the common cold, but then engineer it to have particular epitopes on it which would allow the body to make functional antibodies for the HIV virus, then you could impart HIV immunity using a simple coronavirus vaccine. This idea has been around for a long time. The only time that I've seen evidence that they've tested it was in mice, where the mice, after the second attack of SARS, they immunized them to SARS, when they were again challenged with the SARS virus, they ended up developing an even more severe reaction, which included autoimmunity. So this could be the reason why people are falling in the streets in China, and why the very severe cases of this virus end up to be death. So now the question really is, how fast is it really spreading? The latest paper that's out now gives the range anywhere from 2.7 to 6. 6 would be crazy. And it does seem that at least in certain countries, Korea, China, and Italy, it's starting to go exponential. It's already in 10 different countries in Europe. It's already in South America, so it's on every continent. The question is now, how fast is it going to spread, and how much of a tax is it going to put on our production system, on our commerce, and on our healthcare system? If 10,000 old people in Pittsburgh need to be in the hospital at once, we have a serious problem. So again, I think the worst part about this is the incredible irresponsibility. When you have people like Ben Shapiro telling people to shut up, when you have Donald Trump telling people that everything's going to be okay, when Ludo or whatever that economic advisor guy gets on TV and says everything's going to be fine and the stock market will be fine, you can see what they're concerned with. Check out Dan's blog. It's definitely the guy who got it right. And if you liked it, like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time on JC on a Bike.